Welcome to the Patricia Joe Grover Show, where we turn believers into achievers. And my guest this today is Christine McKay. Let me tell you about a little bit about Christine. She is a global business negotiation strategist and is the author of Sign Here: Negotiation Strategies for the Real World. She has got 26 years of experience negotiating with dozens of Fortune 500 companies. She's passionate about finding common ground, leveling out the playing field, and resolving complex issues on behalf of her clients. Christine empowers you to ask for what you want, provides you with the skills and tools that you need to negotiate it. And when it comes to negotiation, most business agreements end up with people agreeing to things that they weren't really or should never have agreed to. Successful negotiation requires you to operate at the intersection of psychology, analysis, and contracts. In other words, we find and create value, is what she says, is we find and create value, and we understand the people involved, the numbers that drive the economics of the deal, and the words used to describe it. So we all need to hear something from Christine today. So hey, Christine, welcome to the show.
Hello. Hi, it's
Hi.
great to be here. It's so good to see you.
You too. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So, boy, with everything going on right now with today in the world, and people starting new businesses and
Hmm.
trying to get the most out of the contracts that they're already in, that they may need to. Again, with all of us, we've had to pivot and do different things. So, I'm going to have some questions for you.
Sounds great.
All right. So how would you determine the best way to for people to determine their negotiation styles?
We actually have a quiz for that.
Oh,
um, so there's kind of two different aspects to the negotiation style. So one is around how we communicate. And so we've kind of got two different communication attributes that we lay over top of four primary negotiation styles. So somebody is either communicates more traditionally or in a more modern way. So traditional communicators think like old school, old fashioned business. They like to do business on a handshake. Relationships are important. They like meetings. They like thoroughness. They like structure. They like email. They like to have meetings where people are getting together and people are on the same page. And the modern communicator is pretty much the opposite of that. They don't like any of that. They prefer text. If you have to email them, do it in bullets. They tend to make decisions more quickly with less structure. They tend to look more to intuition. So that can be either because they have a broad set of experiences or deep knowledge in an area. And, so they just kind of have this two different types of communication styles. And the reason why it's important to kind of just bucket those two things when you're working with somebody is that how you communicate is initially communicate, how you reach out to somebody, that first phone call, that first impression, that is where you start to build goodwill in a negotiation. And you always want to be building goodwill at the beginning of the negotiation. And then you have four primary negotiation styles, which we call the benefactor, the champion, the maverick, and the ambassador. And the benefactor cares a lot about relationship, and that's what drives how they do business is the relationships. And the challenge for them is that sometimes they'll agree to things that are not in their best interest because they think it's going to hurt the relationship. One of the kind of the dark sides of that style is that because they tend to be very conflict avoidant, they'll sometimes agree to do things that they actually can't deliver, which actually ends up hurting the thing that they value the most, which is relationship. It just doesn't hurt it right at that moment. It might hurt it later down the road. So benefactors have to be very careful with that. A champion a champion also agrees to things in a deal that are not necessarily in their best interest, but for totally different reason. They could care less about relationship. They care about winning at all costs. And they will agree to do things if they think it will allow them to defeat their opponent. Negotiation for a champion is very much about going onto the battlefield, and they go fully armed and fully armored. And so and one of the challenges, the dark side of that is that they can have very tenuous relationships because they care so little many times about their counterpart that they've kind of walked all over their counterpart in many cases. So they have to pay close attention to that. The third one is a maverick, and a maverick is, I call it, most negotiators fall into this maverick category, over 50%. 10% are champions, and another 10% are benefactors, and about 55% are mavericks. And I call them my checklist negotiators. They're the people who have a list. I've got 10 things I want out of this negotiation. Check, I got one, I got two, I got three, I didn't get four, I got five, six, seven, eight, I got 10. Woohoo, I won. I got 8 out of 10,
Yeah.
10 of the things I wanted. So that's what they think. The problem is that numbers 4 and 9, if they had only gotten those two things and sacrificed the 8, they may have created a lot more value. So they can leave a lot of money on the
Oh, okay.
table. They can leave a lot of money on the table. And a little like a champion, they can get fairly emotional in their negotiation and can sometimes get angry when they feel that they're not being heard. And so they have to kind of check that as well. And then the fourth style is an ambassador. And ambassadors are all about kind of reading between the lines. They're all about trying to find a way to create a bigger pie. And one of their challenges is, though, that if they're negotiating with somebody who is a champion or a more aggressive maverick, they can get really frustrated with that. And they are also a little conflict avoidant because they want everyone to win something. They're all about this kind of, not really kumbaya, but they really are trying to problem solve together. And so when you're negotiating with somebody as an ambassador, and you're negotiating with somebody who doesn't give a darn about joint problem solving and only cares about solving their own issue, that can be a real challenge for an ambassador. And because they're always trying to figure out how to create a bigger pie, they can be slower than molasses in January in Maine um, when they're doing that, because they're trying to figure out all the angles, and they'll turn non-issues into issues because that's just kind of what they kind of do. So they all have place. We do all of them. We exercise and use these styles all the time, but we do have one that we tend to default to the most, and because we're not taught how to use the others. And so one of the things that we do is really work to help people understand what their style is and when it's appropriate to use it, and then we teach people how to use the other styles and bring those things forward depending on who they're negotiating with and what the situation is. So
Right, right. So, and where does intuition play a part in any of this?
So, I mean, it depends, I suppose, on, I guess I would ask you the question, how do you define intuition?
Just that gut feeling about something when you're going in to talk to somebody about, you know, and I don't know. That's where it can be tricky, because you're odd. If then you might be automatically assuming that you're
Mm-hmm.
gonna get a certain response from the people you're negotiating with.
So actually, that's one of the biggest challenges. There are two big things that people do when it comes to negotiation. One is they don't understand their own mindset. Your mindset will determine whether or not you are able to achieve what your goals are in your negotiation. If you don't believe it, you can't sell it and you can't position it. So you've got to understand what your mindset is. So if you go into a negotiation and you are anticipating how somebody is going to respond without listening with intent, you're going to miss a lot of things. And so that's a huge mistake, is people assume that they're going to, get something or not get something, and it'll prevent us from actually asking for what we want. And we'll settle because we'll talk ourselves, and it's usually that we'll assume that people won't give us something. We'll say, oh, well, that just feels, especially as women, we have a tendency to do this even more. It's like we're supposed to be grateful for whatever we're given, and but then the downside of that is that we internalize that and say that we shouldn't be asking for more, and we're taught as women not to ask for what we want, that we should be grateful and satisfied with what we've been given. And so it's something that I actually talk to people a lot about, is that mindset that you've got to move away from that, so that you're believing in what you're asking. You have to know that you deserve what you are asking for, just like anybody else.
Right, and that's so true. And what I work with people with, you have to
Exactly.
you have to believe it. You have to believe you're worthy and you deserve it.
Exactly,
Yeah.
because that it makes that whole manifesting is just it's such an important aspect, and you have to be unapologetic about it. So like, right, I always have had funny hair. I have had funny hair, dyed funny colors, awesome colors. This is really
Yes.
faded for me, but I used to work for the largest consulting and accounting firm in the world with hair like this. And
Fantastic.
people would say, how do you do that? And I'm like, I just do. I don't make any apologies. This is who I am. And when we don't make apologies for ourselves and we're just like, this is who I am, this is what I'm about, and then they can either choose to accept that or not. And then that's their decision, right? But it's no different. Asking for what you believe you're worth, asking for what you want, not just what you need, is no different than walking into one of the largest oldest banks in the world with hair that looks like this, selling them millions and millions of dollars worth of business. It absolutely can be done.
Fantastic. And kudos. And again, everybody that's watching and listening, listen to what she's saying because it is so, so true. Fantastic. So, how 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 do you access and adapt to the other side of the deal when you're doing negotiation?
It depends. Sometimes I want to do that and sometimes I don't. So it's really about understanding what you want, understanding who your counterpart is, and then making a strategic decision about how you are going to kind of play, what role you're going to play. Now, when I say that, I don't want it to be assumed that I mean you're taking on an acting role, because that's not it. So like I said, we all have and use all four of the primary negotiation styles, all of us. So it's not about acting. It's about, you've got to be authentic. You've got to be genuine in what you're asking. And you have to be authentic and genuine in terms of how you're working with your counterparts. And I never think of a counterpart as an opponent. I get really testy about that because they're not your opponent. It's you will achieve so much more in life if you figure out how to make something better for both of you. Um, but it's really about listening. It's about kind of modulating kind of how you speak. It's about being prepared. And it's about asking a lot of open ended questions to figure out what the story really is. So I've been working on a negotiation for a couple of clients in Florida, and I'm helping them. I'm working with them to renegotiate aspect of their lease. They both have retail stores, and they've been hit hard by the pandemic. Not as hard as some states because they're in Florida,
Right.
but in talking to the landlord on Friday, I'd been kind of like perplexed. I was trying to figure out what his deal was and kind of where he was at, and he hasn't had a lot of we haven't had a lot of interactions. He's never gotten on a Zoom, so I've never seen him on video. He'll only talk to me on the phone. So you lose a lot when you don't have that
A
interaction.
facial, right,
Yeah, the
expressions and
facial, and also it's like I was on a webinar that was hosted by a professor out of the University of Copenhagen a couple weeks ago, and he had a guest on his webinar who specializes in nonverbal communication, and he was talking about how even like I'm trying to use my hands ever since I sat on this webinar. I've like tried to get much better about engaging, leaning in, pulling back, using my hands, I don't have it with me, but picking up, a whiteboard and problem solving. Okay, these are the numbers I see.
right.
Because when we're in person, we tend to naturally be inclined to help each other. And so if you've got a problem, you might go to a whiteboard and you might both, noodle on the problem and kind of figure out what a solution is.
Right.
But on Zoom or WebEx or whatever video tool you're using, you just don't have that freedom to do that. I think VR will change some of that, but it's not there yet. It's got a long ways to go. So, but how you do that when you're on video is a little bit different than it is when you're in person. But you've got to be prepared. You have to anticipate. So earlier, I can't remember exactly the question you asked me, but what came to my mind just now was that you have to anticipate the downside of a conversation. What if they say no? What's your response? You have to kind of think that through in anticipation, but you don't go in assuming they're going to say no. But it's like, okay, so if they say no, then what? Right? Well,
Right.
there are a lot of ways to get what you want, and there's usually a lot more roads than just one to get you there. And so that's the thing about being prepared, is that you can be creative in how you get to a solution.
Right. And so that it's all being strategic, and even planning for your event and how you're going to do it. It really makes all the difference, doesn't it? Because there's so many things to
Hmm.
take into consideration.
Absolutely.
So so quick tips on how you ask for what you really want.
So that kind of depends on who you're talking to, and what you're trying to accomplish. So if I'm asking somebody who is very kind of more nurturing, right? I'm going to probably sit down beside them if I can be in person. I'm going to get on the phone. I'm going to get on video. I'm going to see their face. I want to create that authentic connection with them. I want to ask them about them. I want to ask them about their family, their community. They probably, I'll have done some homework and some research on any counterparts. So if they're involved in a nonprofit or things like that.
Right.
So if I'm talking to somebody who's a champion, I'm gonna go in and it's just gonna be bang. It's not there's not a lot of warm and fuzzy with a champion. They don't really care about much any of that. And with a champion, I'm going to communicate in a way that lets them think that every good idea was their idea, because that's what they need to do in order to feel that they're winning in the negotiation. If I'm with a maverick, then they can have their personalities. The benefactor and the champion tend to be kind of bookends, in terms of, if you think of a bell curve, they tend to be
Okay.
on ends of the spectrum, and the mavericks and the ambassadors tend to be kind of more in the middle. So it'll depend a little bit on some of the cues that I pick up from a maverick. But I'll pay very close attention to that communication style, whether they're traditional or modern, so that I am adjusting how I communicate with them in a way that appeals to them, because that's where I can start to build, like I said, that goodwill. And that's where I can start to make that adjustment. And then they feel like I'm on their side, is just something as simple as how you communicate.
Fantastic. So these are great tips, everybody. I hope everybody's listening in. So what is a simple formula for demystifying contracts? Because contracts, just again, sometimes I think they throw different words in there just to confuse people.
Oh, yeah, they do. It's the Full Employment Act for lawyers. I love all you lawyers out there. I work with so many of you, and you're awesome, and I'm some of my favorite people. But I am certainly glad that I did not get my law degree. I would not have had the patience. But contracts are actually, this is the thing that I just, we have this thing, and especially as small business owners, people will get a contract. Like, I have a friend he's a machine shop owner, and he machines parts for the aerospace defense industry. So his clients are behemoths: Boeing, Lockheed
Yeah.
Martin, Raytheon, NASA. I mean, just massive organizations. And one guy sent one of these big behemoths sent him a contract and wanted him to commit to expediting 50% of whatever they ordered at no additional cost. And I'm like, so what killed me about that was knowing that there are some small businesses who have signed that agreement. Otherwise, they would not continue to have that in their initial language. They removed it immediately, because they know that it's a stupid request, but they also know that some people are just not going to pay attention. So what happens for a lot of small business owners is they'll get a contract, and they either won't read it and they'll just sign it. They'll read it, they'll not understand it and sign it. Or almost worse still, they will abdicate it and give it to an attorney who knows nothing about their business. And the thing is that contracts they are risk mitigation tools. That's all a contract is. It's a risk mitigation tool. And there are 5 kinds of risks that are embedded in any business relationship, and only one of them is legal. Four of them are business. And this is why it's really important that small business owners learn kind of how to think about this risk in a different way so that they can take control over 80% of their business that they're now giving to, that many of us are giving to lawyers. So the five risks are cash flow, profitability, operations, strategy, and legal risk. And so we teach people how to look at a contract and understand what risk is what. So like payment terms, right? Mm-hmm. That's a cash flow risk. There's a cash flow aspect to that. If you're a software company and you have a strategic roadmap and you have a customer that says, I want that feature that you said you were going to roll out in 18 months. I want it now. Well, that's a strategic risk because that strategic roadmap is driving your entire business. What are the impacts if you move that feature up 18 months? Do you delay something? Do you have the resources to do it? Do you have to get additional software? Do you have to enter into different relationships? Is it going to cannibalize some of your, what is the impact of that? And that one thing could drive a lot of changes. Is it like my client who had, the expediting question, right? It's like, how do you do that? Do you have to enter into new contracts with your shipping vendors because you've got to be able to keep that price low? Are you going to have material on stock to do manufacturing? Do you have the human resources? That's operational risk. How are you going to operationalize this? And profitability is, I had a client once who owed over $1 million in liability to a vendor, and we negotiated that and reduced it by 73%. And so they had to pay a little over $300,000 for, on this liability. And that was a profitability impact because the CEO was trying to position the company to be able to get investors to come in. So we did things like change the product mix, extend the term of the contract, and all these other things because we cared about profitability. So when you think about cash flow, right? I had a client once who, Coca-Cola was one of their large customers, and they were taking 180 days, 6 months to pay them. 6 months to pay them. Now, it wasn't like Coca-Cola couldn't afford to pay them.
Right.
They just weren't paying them very fast. So we had to renegotiate that contract so that we could get them to accelerate their payment because they were going to go out of business. It was during the .com bust of the tech industry, and most of their customers were in the tech space. So they had a shrinking customer base, but they had this one customer who was huge that just wasn't paying. So we had to improve cash flow, that was the rationale we did. So when we do I kind of call it a spaghetti diagram, where we help people look and read contracts to say, does this affect cash flow, profit, operations, strategy, or is it legal? So in California, they passed a law called AB5. It's actually been in the news this whole last week because Uber and Lyft have threatened to pull operations out of California entirely because AB5 would essentially make every one of their drivers an actual employee instead of a contractor. And so it's a huge thing. It has huge implications. And that's a lot changed. And so that's legal risk that, and an element in the contract that would drive negotiation or renegotiation depending on the company. So those are the 5 kind of risks, and when we break those things down and we go into detail with them and have conversations and do practices, we actually practice negotiating all this stuff. So
well, that's fantastic, and that's a fantastic way to support your client and helping them make the best determination that's for them. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So how do you, understanding how well with the large companies, how to negotiate well with large companies, like just for an example, look, I'm looking for a sponsorship for something. Mm-hmm. How is the best way to negotiate something like that?
So I have this axiom that I was reminded of that I've had for years, decades, but it was like brought into stark clarity for me working with these two clients that I have in Florida, because they are these small retailers. They each have one store. They're about 1.5 million in revenue, 20% margin, let's call it. And their landlord is a $12 billion market cap company.
Wow.
It's really hard for companies as small as my clients to have leverage with a company that's as big as their landlord. So my axiom is you should never look to do business with somebody who's more than 2 times the size of where you are trying to go or where you are at, because you want to be able to have suppliers and customers and have relationships that are mutually beneficial. And what ends up happening is that a lot of people just look at the revenue number and they think that, oh my God, if I have a big company customer, I'm getting, everybody uses this particular product, I've got to have this product, instead of looking for adequate alternatives. You lose leverage. But there are some ways to kind of protect a little bit of leverage when you're kind of the smaller player at the table and you don't have as much power or leverage at the table. One is controlling the timeline. Using time as a strategy is very helpful. If it's a complex negotiation, because you're working with a big company, if you're working with a big company, you want to be prepared, and prepared even more, because you cannot be prepared enough. In a big company, everybody is a specialist.
Okay.
Everybody is a specialist. In a smaller organization, people are generalists. And the specialist will always have better information because they're narrowly focused, and information is power. So one of the ways that you can control that is by being super prepared, understanding everything about your business and understanding everything you can about them, their business model, how they make money, all those kind of things. And then controlling the timing. When do you meet? Set a work plan. Literally create a work plan that has all your meetings. You take detailed notes when you're on your calls with them. Send out summary notes saying, this is what we discussed, this is what we agreed, this is what's open, we had issues on this, right? Set out agendas when you're dealing with big companies. Mm-hmm. Never go in kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of freewheeling on it. You need that level of preparation. It gives you credibility when you're talking to a big company to be prepared. Like with this landlord, for example, I had a call with him on Friday, but I'd gone in, so I wasn't actually, his story wasn't making sense to me. So he kind of given me, a bunch of stuff, he gave me a few data points, but they weren't sitting right. There was something about him that wasn't right. So I literally went and I pulled and looked at every one of their properties in the region. There were about 20 of them. And I looked at how many units did they have vacant? What types of tenants did they have in all their properties?
Right.
All of this kind of stuff I started looking at. And I found that my clients are in their most vacant location. And they're the only 2 clients like them in this entire regional portfolio. And I was like, well, that's pretty darn interesting. Right. So when I get on the phone, I'm able to say, so I'm really struggling here because you don't have other tenants like this. So you can't tell me that you have a point of comparison. You have all these other huge tenants that are grocery stores and Target and blah, blah, blah. And so your story isn't making sense. Right. And so then he was like, oh, okay, wow. Okay. So then he had to disclose some information because he had not expected me to have done that homework. Right. And so that builds credibility, being prepared, being kind of driving the agenda, driving the timeline, and then getting to decide when, you know what, I kind of want to take my foot off the gas right now. It's in my interest to kind of slow things down, or it's in my interest to accelerate, right?
Right.
And being able to figure out how to use timing as a strategic tool to give yourself, to build leverage when you think that there really isn't any. is really powerful.
That's fantastic information. Thank you so much, because
Hmm.
I think a lot of people are in that same boat. Yeah, they really need
Absolutely.
to know that. So, then another thing that independent business owners need to be hearing about now is how you negotiate to get your account payables paid.
Mm. So the big thing is that, so the thing, well, I do this seminar on renegotiation, and I, it's a different process than a negotiation, because negotiation, both parties have something to gain. In a renegotiation, usually one party has something to lose because the deal is working for them. So why would they renegotiate it? So there's a different dynamic to that kind of request. So in an accounts payable situation, if you owe money, whether you owe it personally or you owe it for your business, that's a renegotiation. And the thing that people have the hardest time doing is asking. So we are taught, right, that our word is our bond. And kind of the follow on that I hear people all the time talk about is, well, I have a contract. I have to, it's a contract. The contract is the contract is the contract. And love all my lawyer friends, but a lot of times lawyers will like cause this like paranoia that, oh my God, if I break the contract, then, the world is going to end. It will be a catastrophic event. But the
Right.
reality is that if you believe in having a customer for a lifetime, if you believe in that, then renegotiation should be part of your sales strategy. Because just
Mm.
like in a marriage or any relationship, you get into it, you have a set of expectations. Time marches on. And guess what? Expectations aren't met. And somebody always wins more in a negotiation than the other side. But the thing is that over time, sometimes that has to switch, right? The deal that we may have entered into 5 years ago, it isn't working for you, and you're like, I need, and maybe I won a little bit more at the negotiation table.
Right.
All right, so what do we need to do to make that switch? What do we need to do to make that deal work for you? Because if you believe in a customer for a lifetime, you'll fight to keep your customers for a lifetime. I just had a call last week with somebody who does videography work, and they're having kind of an issue with one of their really good clients that they've had for many years. And they're like, well, we were thinking that maybe we'd have to do a refund. I said, why don't you just redefine what what your relationship is? You don't have to talk about refunds all the time. You don't have to talk about losing customers. You can do it by asking to have a conversation to figure out what to say, to acknowledge this is not working. This is hurting my business. I can't survive if I keep doing this. So what can we do to switch things up? How could that, what could that look like? And you have to have a sense of what that's going to be when you go in to ask for it. And because when you owe money, you owe money, right? But a lot of times, I mean, heck, the IRS will send out, emails all or notes all along saying if you owe back taxes, then they'll you can work with somebody and they'll negotiate it down. If you can negotiate down with Uncle Sam, you can negotiate down with anybody. My view is if you can conceive it, you can paper it. So meaning that you can write it into a contract.
Yeah.
But you got to ask. You just have to ask, and that fear of asking is really hard because we have that, my word is my bond, a contract is a contract, and we wrap up the word failure a lot in
Yeah.
in the notion of renegotiation. But it's not failure, it's literally just how life works. It's not always going to be going our way 100% of the time. But if you're invested in helping your customer or your supplier or your investors be successful, and they're also invested in helping you be successful. On the topic of renegotiation, whether it's an accounts payable or a contract that you've had for a decade or that you just signed 3 months ago, should not be a hard conversation. It should absolutely be askable.
Right. Right. And so this brings me to what so many people are dealing with right now, because we have so many contracts in our lives that we don't even realize.
Yes.
You have a contract with your cell phone company, you have a contract with your oil delivery company, you have,
Hmm.
all these different things.
Especially in New England.
Yes, yes. Yeah, but what the is it plumbing and heating would be for your air
Yeah.
conditioners and
Oh,
other
yeah.
places.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, in LA, we
you're
have
right.
HVAC. Or, yeah. Yeah.
Right,
Exactly.
right. But we all have all these contracts. Do you
Yeah.
recommend, because I teach people in what I do with them, that we set plans, and we set our planning days, whether our weekly planning day, our monthly,
Hmm.
and all that stuff. But to really look at how where we are on the journey of achievement. But when you're talking contracts and stuff, shouldn't we renegotiate, or not renegotiate, but shouldn't we pull them out and look at them every so often, just to see, and then do our how close are we to fulfilling this obligation, or having them fulfill that obligation to us?
Yeah. I mean, and yes, that's my view, is that we should constantly be looking at not constantly, but we should be looking at the relationships periodically. So actually, cell phone companies kind of have this model, right, of every couple years, right? You have a new phone, or you
Right,
get a
right.
new contract, right? That's a minimum, is would be every other year. I pull out my stuff and I go, okay, do I need this? Do I need to do something different with it? If you've got credit cards, you can call and try to get your interest rates lowered. You can change your payment dates. That you can do that with anything that's loan based, your car loan, a mortgage, any of those things. If it's your mobile phone, they're constantly changing their plans. And so there are often better plans than you can get. And we know somebody who used to work for Verizon. And she actually, when I've said this in front of her, she's like, oh, yeah, we used to get plans all the time. And of course, we're not going to call and tell customers, yeah, you can get a better deal, but you can get a better deal. So at least every other year. And in working for corporations, I would get so frustrated when I'd have these contracts that were 10, 15, 20 years old, that they just keep like going like this, because they just do like an amendment here, an amendment here. And I like, you and I are about the same age. So I'm like sitting there, I was reading one contract and they had Y2K language this was like 2 years ago, and they had
Wow.
Y2K language, and I'm like, it's 2018. Y2K was almost two
Yeah.
decades ago.
Right.
And why? And it was 2 decades ago when you would have put it in your contract. What the hell is it still
Right.
sitting in here for?
Exactly.
So there, to me, there's value in going in your corporate contracts. Like, I don't like evergreen contracts, which just means that a contract just keeps renewing over and over and over and over and over, unless it's literally something so simple and so frequently used. But if it's a meaningful contract, my view is it should be reviewed every 5 years in totality, not just a clause here and a clause there, but review the whole thing, make sure that it's relevant, that the language is relevant to where you're at today, and not be afraid of renegotiating it. Just because a contract's up for renewal and you have a contract, it's no different than any other renegotiation. If if all aspects of it are not working, then you know do
Right.
something about it. Ask
Exactly.
to fix, ask to make it work.
Ask. That's that thing. Ask. Yes.
I should figure out a good acronym for ask.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, but yeah, I mean, that's it. You have to ask. So,
Yeah.
but people
Well,
don't.
right. And again, I don't know if it is, when you talk legal things, I think people think, oh, that's so above them and their
Yes.
understanding, that then they just say, oh, well, hey, if I don't have to go through and I don't have to take it to my lawyer, back to my lawyer to read, I don't want that expense or whatever. They just say, okay, we'll just do that little amendment, and I can understand that couple paragraphs that you added
Hmm.
to it, and that's it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what
Well,
happens.
I mean, I definitely think that plays into it. I mean, the average small business spends about $7,500 a year on legal fees, like just
Right.
basic, just general kind of getting something written up, incorporating, and that is totally dependent on where you live. But yeah, I mean, I think that that's one of the reasons why it's so important for me to talk about risk in a way that helps business owners understand that the contract is not, it doesn't have to be a scary document. And the wheretofores and the thus fars and the whereases and all that garbage, you can read around it because it doesn't, it, it just, from a business perspective, the major 80% of a contract is business related. And
Right.
as the business, as the entrepreneur, as the business owner, as the business professional, you know more about your business than most attorneys. There are a couple of exceptions. The entertainment industry, those lawyers are the business. They know their business. And but it's different, like especially if you're working with a general attorney, general corporate attorney,
Right.
right?
Right.
They're where they're working with a lot of different types of clients and lots of different types of industries, and it's a different kind of setup. And I actually have a lot of law firms actually reaching out recently to me asking me to teach them to go and do programs for them to teach negotiation to their attorneys.
Right.
And so we have this, the other thing is we have this misconception that attorneys are good negotiators.
That's not their lane.
That is not, they are good at knowing the law.
Right. Right.
They are good at keeping you out of court. That does not necessarily mean they are all, just like everything else, things are on a bell curve. That does not necessarily mean that they are good at negotiating.
Right.
Just like CEOs and CFOs, people assume they're good at negotiating. The number of deals that I've had to unwind that CEOs and CFOs went into is crazy, because they can get, especially the CEOs, for some reason, they just kind of like take out a napkin over 2 bottles of wine and draw out a bunch of stuff. And it's like, okay, we're going to do this. And it's like, what? And somebody like me or the CEO goes, what? What did you decide to do? What did you agree to do?
Right.
So, but yeah, but the thing is that we negotiate every single day of our lives.
Really,
And
when you think about it, we do.
we do with our partners. We negotiate with ourselves. We are constantly negotiating, and we make deals with our families. We make deals with ourselves. Um, you know, and it's just, so we're constantly doing it. We're better at negotiating than we think we are. But negotiation is often, it's like a public speaking. It's a social phobia. And so people are afraid of it because they're afraid they're going to be rejected. They're afraid they're going to get retaliated against. They're and because of this fear, they just, and I also kind of blame academia, and it's exacerbated in the sales world, where it's become like this big game, and to win or lose. And the thing is that it's not. It's really about relationship. That's all negotiation is about relationship. Creating, building, and growing a relationship that has benefit for both or all parties involved. And that's really all it's about.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Again, I was just going to ask you, what tidbits would you have for, just the average small business person? And right there, you just hit, I didn't even have to ask you. That was right there. I think that was it, right?
It's just a relationship, and you're all good at it. All of us have relationships, right? Finding the right relationships. It's the same as it is in our personal world, because that horrible, ridiculous saying, well, it's not personal, it's just business. Well, that's malarkey. That's just baloney, because it is personal. Business is personal. And do business with people that you like. If you feel like, if you're in a negotiation, like, one of the big tips I would give you, that I will tell all your viewers, is don't be afraid to walk away. Walk away, walk away, walk away. If you feel uncomfortable, if there's something that's gnawing at you, that's not sitting right in your gut, that you're just going, oh, this isn't, then guess what? Go with your gut and walk away, get up from the table and say, I just don't think this is going to work. Right. And be honest with yourself about that and embrace that, because that is that is valuable information that you have. I mean, um, oh, what's his name? Wrote Outliers, David and
Oh,
Goliath, Tipping Point.
yeah.
Malcolm
Yeah.
Gladwell.
Okay.
Malcolm Gladwell talks about this. He talks about how we have this gut reaction when something is wrong, and lean into that. To your comment earlier around intuition, lean into that more, because if it feels, if this person, because it's not the business, if the person feels like somebody you should not be doing business with, there is another person out there that you could be doing business with
Right.
that's a better fit for you. It's okay.
Right.
It's not, it we don't appeal to everybody. So lean into that and do not be afraid to walk away. It is the most important tool you have at your disposal in negotiation, is the right to walk away.
Right. And just like Christine in our business, when you're speaking, we speak so that people get to know, like, and trust us, because that's
Mm-hmm.
what we're sharing. We're sales. Everybody's a salesperson because we sell ourselves, and that's what it is. And the
Mm-hmm.
thing is, if you want people to know, like, and trust you, then you have to be yourself. And if you're not yourself,
Yeah,
they know you're not yourself, and
exactly.
and they're not going to know, like, or choose to know you. They're not going to particularly care for you, and they're definitely not going to trust you.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
that's what it's all about. Yeah.
Yep. Exactly.
Fantastic. Oh goodness, I'm so glad I had you on.
I'm
Yeah.
so glad you had me. This has
Yeah.
been fantastic. I've loved it.
Yeah. So, if anyone has questions for Christine, definitely we'll put them down below, and I'm sure she'll more than happily get back to you.
Yes.
So, Christine, do you have any special gifts for our viewers?
Yes. If you text, so for anyone's in the US, if you text negotiate to 26786, you can learn your default negotiation style. And that will change how you think about asking the next time. And think
Yeah.
about it in terms of when somebody's asking you, you can think about what that default negotiation style is, and start to think about whether or not that style is the right style for the situation, and you can get more strategic about how you're using style to your advantage.
That sounds really, really cool, actually. So I'm going to have to check that out. For anyone who'd like to know more about me, you can go to patriciajogrover.com. And all my social media, you can go to www.pjg.vcardinfo.com. All my social media is there. And also, if you'd like to be a guest on my show, the link and directions is right there. And I have the gift for you is going to be followed up in the video right behind us. So thanks for joining us, and thanks for being with me, Christine.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good to see you.